There's a place I visit on Sundays, and one of the things I appreciate about the place is that they wait for no quorum. So if I said the starting time is 9 o'clock, even if there are 2 or 3 people in the room, the proceedings begin. And I always say to comrades, maybe we should take a lift from the people who gather there on Sunday. And they always start with something short. If 1 or 2 are gathered in my name, I will be amongst them. And the thing starts. All right. And what's happened, Daniel, Sebastian, Sam, and Sean, we've had a change of presidency in South Africa, which I'm sure you know.
Yes.
And in the first gathering of the new ANC president, which happened on the 8th or around the 8th of January, the former president of the ANC came late, and he was scolded in public with all the television. And then the new president said, this late coming must come to an end. And our people have been sitting and waiting. And this tendency of leaders to keep our people waiting. So I said, you see, without getting into the politics, someone who came from a union who knows that meetings start on time. So I think we should start.
Discipline.
We should start. We have a very important discussion this morning. For those who were not here yesterday, welcome. My name is Dinga. I work for Chisimani Center for Activist Education in Cape Town, and spent a lot of years, let me declare, in NUMSA. Today, this morning before tea, from 9 o'clock to about 11, we are going to have a discussion on the utility that we were talking about yesterday, Eskom. And to kickstart the discussion on Eskom, and I'm keen that it be a discussion to involve people who are sitting around here with a lot of experience, either as consumers or either as people who work at Eskom, Comrade Ram, the people who work at Eskom. So we will kickstart the discussion with Salim Fakir, and Salim is from WWF, and he will speak about his understanding of the crisis in Eskom and the challenges that face the utility. And there was a bit of an exchange, Salim. Brian Ashley said, I'm throwing the baby with the bathwater. And then I threw it back to him and said, don't act like a Eskom shop security. We are here to fix a big crisis. And so the scene has been set. And Vuyo Pikicha, who is NUMSA's energy coordinator and spends most of his time at Megawatt Park, is here to speak and give a union perspective on the crisis. So that's the people will kickstart, and Salim has promised to speak for 20 minutes. That's his offer, and Vuyo said he will keep it for 50 minutes. And then we will allow for discussion, and I can see from yesterday's discussion, people are eager to jump in. Salim, let's start.
Thanks. Well, it's always a pleasure to be here. And I just wanted to maybe set the scene by saying you probably all know what's going on in Eskom. and maybe what I'm going to try to do is conceptualize it from four areas. I think the one is to understand that because Eskom is a vertically integrated company, it is actually the energy system. Because when we talk about energy supply industry, Eskom is it. So it's both a utility and it's the system itself. So I want you to imagine a company that owns everything. It owns the generation, it owns the transmission, it owns the distribution. Not all the distribution, but certainly a large part of the distribution. And when we talk about transformation of the energy supply industry, conceptually, we cannot split the utility from the system, but we probably have to do that. So I think we have to understand that, and I want to introduce that concept because I think in our country we have a unique situation where we got one large public utility which is a monopoly, but it's a monopoly and a system itself. Okay, makes it very hard to maneuver and very difficult to transform it. But it suggests that if we want to change it, you can't just change Eskom, but you have to also change the way the system works. The second part is that whichever way you look at it, the utility Eskom is going through the same challenge as many other utilities around the world have, facing a situation of a death spiral, or what other utilities have experienced is a scissors effect because of cheaper electricity that is being entering into the supply industry. And the scissors effect is basically that when your costs go up and your ability to recover those costs go down, it means that every time you operate your assets or your company or the system, it cannot meet its obligations, and because the cost is just going up. And part of the reason is that as the price of the irony is that as the price of electricity goes up, and given the factor of new technologies and the ability of people to enter an electricity supply industry outside of the existing structure, has an impact on Eskom's revenue. The third thing, which is what we should be debating, is a new paradigm. Is the new paradigm about selling off Eskom's assets? Will that solve the problem? Is the new paradigm about diversifying generation and how we think about supply? Or is the new paradigm about shifting the entire system, and Eskom is part of an element of that system? I think this question of the new paradigm we got to debate after we've had this inputs in this session. But let me state what is already an obvious understanding of the situation in Eskom, because you read about it not only from the Gupta leaks, but you read about currently the debates around wage negotiations, bonuses for people, the debt of Eskom. All those sorts of things give us an impression that Eskom is not in a good situation. But I want to structure the conversation around Eskom situations around a couple of issues that are impacting on this notion of the death spiral or the scissors effect. The first is that it has high operating costs. And it's not just got to do with generation. It's not only got to do with the coal cost. As I said to you, if we conceive Eskom as a public company and it's a system itself, the costs are all interrelated, right? So it's not just Eskom's ability to get cheap electricity, but its ability to supply electricity at an affordable level within the system. Okay, so those high operating costs are going up. The second is that there's a high debt burden, which is affected also by lower credit ratings. So we have a situation where Eskom's current debt is around 388 billion, and it's set to rise to 600 billion. Okay, which means that its portion of interest, separate the capital cost from the interest, is ballooning at a very rapid rate. And so if you go into the financial analysis of Eskom's, you'll find what they call debt coverage ratio is shrinking over time. And the main reason is because the interest costs are going up. The cost of operating Eskom is going up, and its ability to recover revenue either through more customers or through higher tariffs is undermining its ability to be able to service its debt over the next few years. And that then it means that it has to go to the PIC to borrow 5 billion rand or more in order to find money to keep its operations going. But that 5 billion has to be paid back to PIC with interest. At the same time, it's got these other debt that it's bought from either from foreigners or the local market, which it has to pay off. So the other challenges are, as I mentioned to you, declining sales, and we'll come to details of why we have declining sales. Its overall operating costs are going up. And if you look at, I don't know if people have had access to maybe I had privileged access to it, but I looked at the application for the multi-year price determination. This is the application that Eskom puts into the regulator and requests tariffs for the next 3 years. So if you look at MYPD 4, and what I was astonished at is that the average cost of coal, which used to be about 120, 150 rand a ton, is now around 500, 560 rand a ton. Experts say that it can vary anything from 100 to rand a ton to 800 rand a ton, depending on where you supply, where you get your supply from. But the average in the MYPD is set at that. And this is largely because Eskom has had to, it's got a high dependency on coal because 90% of our electricity comes from that. And if you have to understand what's happening with the political economy of coal, okay? So it's moving away from those cost-plus mines in which Eskom used to get very good rates because the miners needed to supply half the coal into Eskom, and they could only then be able to afford to sell the rest on the global market. Okay, what's happened now is that that dual system is breaking down, and that the incentive for the 5 or 6 top coal mining companies is now to sell most of the coal, even the worst coal that you can get, onto the export market, which is mostly India, China, and other countries, at around 1,000 rand or more a ton. Okay, so you can see they can get much more for exports than they would get from selling. And so the argument they're using is like Glencore used, that if you want Eskom's want cheap coal of a structured contract that is gives certainty to the price of coal, they must recapitalize the mines. Okay, and then Eskom has entered into, for black empowerment reasons or whatever reason, into short-term and medium-term contracts, and inevitably those contracts, which includes the transport cost, result in Eskom having to pay higher prices for its coal. But I think I need to appraise you that the new coal-fired power plants are in Limpopo. The idea was to exploit coal from the Waterberg area. That coal is of poor quality. It requires a lot of water to clean the coal in order to make it usable in the coal-fired power plants. The coal is of lower energy quality. So in other words, its calorific value is lower. And that when you have a lower calorific value, if you try to generate electricity, you need to put more and more of that coal in order to be able to generate the requisite kilowatts. In the last year, coal costs went up by 3.8% per ton. And given these high cost situations, Eskom's cost of generating electricity, which includes component of transmission, coal cost, transmission, and distribution, is about 90 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay? It used to be around, at one point, I think 10 cents, then it went to 30. I remember many years ago, like 10, 15 years ago, when they did the levelized cost of energy for coal, it was around 25, 30 cents. So it's gone up substantially, the generation cost. The prediction is by 2022, it will be around 1.30 a kilowatt hour. Okay. The current ability of Eskom to be able to undertake what is called a full cost recovery, recover all its costs in order to balance its books, including make some profit, is way under what it should be. In other words, it can't get the tariffs it needs, despite the fact that tariffs have gone up by double since 2008. Some people even say 5 or 6 times, just depending on how you calculate it. So in other words, the consumer is having to pay higher tariffs, but they are also not full cost tariffs. So in other words, the argument that Eskom is making is that every time NERSA gives an increase, the last time it gave an increase of 5.5%, which was much lower than the 19% they requested. This time they're asking for 15%. It's still not able to recover its full cost. But it needs increased profitability or cash flow in order to pay its interest and its debt, okay? And find some money to be able to pay for its 40,000 staff or something of that equivalent. So how is Eskom planning to exit the mess? Okay, so there are a number of indications of that in the NYPD, in the news reports, in the board reports. They recognize that, if the government recognizes, everybody recognizes, who do financial analysis will tell you that the Eskom is one of like those big banks, you know, the Lehman Brothers, and okay, we're celebrating Lehman Brothers now, but it's too big to fail. And the reason for that is that if you look at its level of debt, it's almost a quarter of our national budget. In other words, this debt would not be possible without the government giving it's about 30%. 30% of 30. Without the government providing guarantees. So you can't raise, Eskom can't raise anymore just on the basis of its own balance sheet. Money it needs the national government to provide the guarantees. And those guarantees then give assurance to creditors that if Eskom is not able to pay, they can call on the national government. So in other words, basically the national government is us, the taxpayer. Yeah? So we got to pay for all the blunders that are made. And so if Eskom collapses, there's huge crisis for the national economy. From a debt point of view, never mind the fact that we don't have electricity and the economic knock-on effect on the economy. Eskom's main challenge at the moment is not only being able to pay the debt, but is being able to catch up, to have enough cash flow, liquidity, and to be at the same time be able to pay for new construction. Okay, so these are triple challenges it's faced with. So the first challenge is being able to catch up in being able to service its debt, raise more debt to ensure it has liquidity, and then being able to pay for its build program, specifically the 2 coal plants, which have already had cost overruns by double or 3 times what the early estimates were. So Eskom is saying, well, part of the problem is unaccounted for spend. The second part is that we're going to deal with corruption. The third is that it's blaming the municipalities for some of the problem. There's already a municipal debt around 13 billion. And we can come back to why we have the situation in municipalities. It needs to decommission old plants, about 12,000 gigawatts by 2030. That's in the IRP. They're running at 71 to 78% capacity factor, which means that usually these coal plants should run at about 90%. When you're running at 90%, you're obviously generating more electricity. If you run them at 71%, that tells you that the machines are getting old, they require constant repairs. And if you look at Eskom's analysis of its maintenance plan, it has what is called planned maintenance, and then it got unplanned maintenance. Unplanned maintenance schedules are growing, and that's increasing also the cost. The suggestion is to export more power. It already exports around 8%, I think mostly to Zimbabwe and neighboring countries. It also imports from Kahora Bassa, although those imports have declined over the last 2-3 years. And then it's got to, in order to build the new renewables, it has to move further south where the resource is. It has to expand its grid capacity to transmission lines. So it needs funding for that. I think that was between 15 to 19 billion estimate. If it wants to keep Medupe and Kusile going, if the 12,000 gigawatts is decommissioned, it needs to actually invest in new coal mines. And most importantly, it needs to invest in new water resources in order to be able to utilize that very dirty and low energy value coal. For 2019, Eskom needs about 72 billion. It's only secured 22%. I think after the BRICS Bank contribution from China, that number is probably gone.
Say that again.
It needs to raise 72 billion for 2019 financial year in order to keep its affairs running and to be able to pay for new build, which includes contractors for Medupe and Kusile. If I'm correct, we have 3 units of Medupe running and 1 of Kusile, and the others should come online. That gives us about 600 megawatts per each unit. So it's something like 2,400 is what's in commercial operation. Then Eskom's most controversial, and I think this is where the unions will debate this, is that it's got to retrench staff between 7,000 to 10,000 staff in order to lower its operating costs. And that, I think, is good. You can see the real quagmire that Eskom is. And I'm just painting a picture that I think shows a very complicated story, that it's not simply just getting the finances right, but it's around the very future of the coal industry itself and the future of the system, and the complexity of the interlinkages between the three, between those power plants, the coal industry, and what we do about the energy system. And this is not just about putting more renewables into the grid, because we'll still be stuck with the same problem. I just want to appraise you of that. This is not about just cheaper renewables, but we have a systemic situation that requires some radical restructuring of that. There's a narrative of privatizing, and there could be other narratives that people are talking about. But what does the future leave us with, which is what I'm going to try to end with. I'm nearly 20 minutes, Dinga. I'm exceeding 1 minute. I want to argue very vociferously that even if you put new, cheaper renewables into Eskom, it doesn't change the system, and it doesn't mean that the fact that the utility is getting cheaper electricity will transfer that benefit to the consumer. We've seen that in so many other utilities around the world. Okay, some utilities, in the case of Eskom, is going to try to absorb it to deal with its current mess. In other global utilities, they usually make profit. They would not transfer the benefit to the consumer. And there's been cases in with Osgem in the UK with gas industry. So I want to assure you that cheaper renewables will not mean cheaper tariffs. Okay, and we can come to that debate. The more important factor is that if we continue the structure now, will Eskom survive a new technology wave? And this has got nothing to do with ownership or the whole politics around Eskom. We are in the throes of a technology shift. It's a disruptive technology. Let's try to understand who owns the technology, how the technology is evolving, and how will it materialize outside the boundaries of the system, okay, which is owned by Eskom. That I think we have to grasp it, because that's got to do with the fact that we have improved storage technologies and more decentralized models emerging that do not require utility scale players to enter it. In fact, it's the likes of Google, Amazon, and all these people that are moving into the space, because it's largely stuff that's happening in the cloud, and the generation capacity is just a piece of hardware that is generating electricity, but how you actually distribute it and share the cost is becoming much more digitized and evolving into a more intelligent system. Okay, that's because of new technologies. The truth is that whichever way one looks at it, the future of coal, it means higher input cost and higher operating and maintenance costs. There will definitely be a decline in sales because of this technology shift, and the level of trust in the ability of the utility to be sustainable and financially healthy is causing a lot of the larger players like the mining industry and so on, including Sasol, which is trying to move gas to generate about 700 megawatts of its own power, become totally independent. So if we got bigger players like that starting to move out, means that those people, that means its customer base is largely going to become residential, commercial, and not heavy industries. The larger industries are completely moving to cheaper sources because they can do so. So we do need a new paradigm around the system. We need a new paradigm for how we tackle the new age of technology. And then the question arises, what about ownership and social welfare? So I leave you at that. Thanks. 23 minutes, sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine.
I didn't realize I can talk so long.
Thanks very much, Salim. And I think a lot of points for discussion. But let me this guy's from Uruguay. Let's give way now to Vuyo to give his picture. You've just come to the front, to the front, comrade. You've just come out of wage negotiations, and I'm sure all this information they put in front of you as the union. It's Vuyo Pikicha. As he's coming, he's as I said, the coordinator for NUMSA for energy. His job title is energy coordinator, not Eskom. Although he spends, we complain. We are fought over that. He spends a lot of time at Eskom when he's an energy coordinator. But that's internal politics at NUMSA.
Thanks, Committee. I think basically to take from where Comrade Fakir left, that yes, in Eskom we're having a problem. We're having a crisis as we speak today. And having gone through the financial statements of Eskom, the recent one that were released just in June, July, the issue of the liquidity of Eskom and solvency is a serious problem. You can see it in the balance sheet. You can see it in when you look into the liabilities and assets of Eskom, that there's a mismatch. There's not enough cash, not cash, but there's not enough assets to be able to meet the obligations in terms of liquidity and solvency. And part of the problem is I agree with Comrade Fakir that the problem of the primary energy cost is a serious problem in Eskom, where mainly coal has been escalating over a period of from say 1994 to 2014. The price of coal has escalated very exponentially. And one of the problems is that the coal contracts, those tendering and procurement processes are problematic, in the sense that Eskom is not complying with the legislations in terms of the PFMA opening up of old contracts. We know of evergreen contracts that never get changed, and so some of the problems that are there in terms of primary cost. And Eskom can do a lot to change or to save money by managing those particular primary energy costs. So as a union, it's an area that we want that Eskom must look into that, because that's what partly creates the burden and the problem of debt, because the money goes thrown out into the primary energy cost. And the second area we have identified as NUMSA, and we have spoken about this publicly and in court, that the cost of which are included in the primary energy cost is the cost of the IPPs. That the amount of money Eskom pays the IPPs, which is money that comes from consumers, from clients, not coming from government, but the government guarantees, but the actual people who are paying out, because that's passed to customers. So controlling primary energy cost in terms of coal and in terms of the IPP, the renewables that are brought into the grid, are serious areas of concern for us that can assist in reducing the indebtedness of Eskom. And as a union, it's an area that we really want to attend. We have raised it in the negotiations. Dina, you were saying that point, that the cost drivers in Eskom, more than Eskom not wanting to give workers adjustment and increases and benefits, the key issues are the cost drivers. We're saying particularly executive pay is one serious problem. The executives and top management is bloated, but their benefits and their segment or share of the wage bill is too exorbitant. It needs to be worked at. So we're raising those issues. But if you look into the financial statements of Eskom that we mentioned, in terms of cash and cash equivalents, in terms of what your Eskom's bank balances as we speak today, or after the financial year closed in at the end of March, you find that it's more than 15 billion rands, which is liquid cash that's available for Eskom. That's why we're raising in the negotiations that they can't ask us as the unions, combat board, as to where must Eskom find the money for the increases, because there are bank balances that are clear and they're found in the statements and in the notes, and they are more than 15.7 billion. We have raised that issue. Then one of the problems of Eskom, comrades, is the issue of the governance of Eskom. Some people can talk about about corporate governance, which is a concept that is not close to us, civil society and trade unions, because we believe in democratic governance. We believe in democratic ownership and control of the public utility. The way Eskom is structured is, and Dina raised this thing yesterday, is too much corporatized, too much commercialized. So we need to use the 3 Ds basically that we normally use in the energy sector. First, we need a democratization of Eskom. Without Eskom being democratized, energy democracy, Eskom is going to continue to be in the same problem they are, and Eskom is under threat of being privatized. So we say democratization is very important, and that's a NUMSA resolution particularly, that the governance at Eskom has to be driven by trade unions, by civil society, by community, by the working class. That the board of Eskom has to be terminated and another structure or form of governance set into place. We have said in the past as NUMSA and COSATU that we used in the late 90s, early 20s, I think, where Eskom was governed by an electrical council with representatives from Labour. COSATU was represented, Anob Buigwenda represented NUMSA, Anob Benifenarov represented NUMSA, and other representatives from NUM and other organizations. We need to get into that the majority of the board or the governing structure of Eskom has to be composed of the working class and civil organizations.
If I may interrupt, when did this happen, this board? When was this board in place? Or is this something?
The board was, I can't specifically remember the year now, but it's when Eskom was converted, was commercialized, and could be late 90s or early 2000s.
Okay.
2003. I can't remember the date exactly as to when that. So the key issue is the mandate of Eskom has to be based on communities, based on the workers, based on civil society. It can't be a mandate that is talking about profits instead of people. It can't be profit-centric. It has to be people-centric so that our development goals as a country are carried forward. One of the problems that we spoke about the irregular expenditure, about I think 19 billion or 21.7 billion, which Eskom has not been able to account for. So money is being thrown out into the Guptas, into the coals, as we have said. So these are some of the problems. The other problem is the carbon. There's too much carbon as we speak in Eskom. Environmental sustainability is a problem. Eskom is struggling to meet air quality requirements and standards. So these are some of the areas that we need to talk to. But Eskom cannot be changed if we're not organized, all of us, without any fragmentations, environmental organizations, civil society organizations, trade unions, and communities. We're not going to be able to transform Eskom, democratize Eskom, or decommodify Eskom, or decommodify it if we're not organized. And the other issue that one wanted to raise is that as NUMSA, we stand for job protections. We must defend jobs, and the transition we're talking about must be a transition that goes at the pace and price, and Vote must have said this yesterday, at the pace and price that does not compromise jobs. And we're saying that's possible to include and increase renewable energy to the system without radically ending the coal jobs. We're saying, the way we look at it is that coal production can continue at a reduced pace and reduced level, and renewables can always be added more into the system, as long as we defend the jobs. And we indicated yesterday and this morning that the problems we have with unemployment and poverty and inequality are important that we address those as well as part of Eskom's program. I'm going to pause the committee.
Okay. Thank you, Guido. We have an hour and 15 minutes for discussion. Sandra?
Yes.
Okay. We have an hour, which is a good time. I know that sometimes we ask questions and make comments, but this is a big issue. I mean, just from the inputs here. And no amount of slogans, no amount of long preambles is going to make us get closer to how we solve this challenge. And I think I'm not saying the people who spoke yesterday, that was not important. It was setting the context. We are now dealing with the core of what this conference is about. And I think that for this not to be just another conference, and David-led conferences, it's important that we structure the discussions. So my proposal about how we do this, and I know that people don't like it, is for people to ask questions of clarity. Now I know when comrades say ask questions, don't infantilize us. We have opinions. I don't think egos are going to work. Let's ask some questions that are not too clear, and then we'll try and structure a discussion so that we there's the issues of finance, there's the issues of technology, there's issues of that, so that we have a much more structured debate than like seawater, forward, backwards, and all over the place. Is that I'll try and be democratic, but I think it's important that we zoom in on the issues without. Is that acceptable the way of proceeding? Yeah. Okay, it seems there's a heated agreement.
So we start with.
Okay, so what we want to start with now is whether there are issues which in your listening and when we refer to your notes, as I see people are taking notes, in what Salim and Vuyo said, you just not, is it 15 billion, is it 1 billion, or it doesn't matter, that's unaccounted for, or is it the, whatever clarity question, just so that there isn't talking at cross purposes. And we just need those clarities. And then we're going to go into the substantive discussions. Sean, it looks as if that's a.
You have a question.
You have a question. Okay. I'm taking. I see you taking. Okay. No. Sean, you have a question of, and if I may ask, also point who you're directing the question to, if you can, so that that can be answered. Sean, Brian, and Tembega, and okay. Sean, Brian, Tembega, and comrade Bongi. Okay, comrade Bongi. Let's take those 4, and then you'll introduce as a comrade from Tips, and there's Chavez, and there's Batamba, and there's David. I see you, Richard. That would be okay. Let's take those first 4, and then we will note. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sean?
First of all, thank comrades for the incredibly useful presentations. My question is for both, actually. In terms of the relative challenges of the IPP pass-throughs, the passing on, and the primary coal costs, is what would you say is the biggest driver? It sounds from the first presentation, Salim's presentation, that it was the sort of exponential increase in the cost of coal. But the comrade Puyo from NUMSA also referred to the IPP, the power purchase agreements. And that leads me to a second question, is at 90 cents a kilowatt hour, the levelized cost for coal, that's presumably for coal generation. How does that compare with the auction prices, the PPA delivered cost? Because one of the issues I think we're dealing with globally is this markup, the profiteering of the PPAs. And yes, the auctions, we discussed yesterday how the auctions have brought down the costs, but there's still that gap between the actual costs of delivering renewable power and the cost of basically associated with profit and the multinationals being involved. So working out what the solutions would be, this would be, I think, important data. I have many other questions, but in the interest of time.
Okay. All right. That's a nice slogan. One comrade, one question. Okay. Okay, Brian, maybe just for everyone else, you just say what your name is, so that I don't refer to others. That comrade and Brian that side, so that we yeah.
I'm Brian Ashley from AIPC. Thanks for the presentations. Very good, really useful. I just want to get more clarity about the question of the coal, the cost plus contract arrangements. do we have any knowledge or information as to what the plus is? You know, what is the scale? Because you're paying cost of production plus some profits or return to the coal mines. So that's, you know, what is that range? Because what's confusing me is the requirement of the coal miners for Eskom to do their recapitalization. Why are these coal miners not doing the recapitalization from their own profits? And that raises another question. There was a lot of controversy in the days of surplus electricity about these long-term contracts that Eskom had with the big energy users, where BHP Billiton, etc., were paying very, very low electricity costs. Are those still in existence? Do we know information around that? And then the third question, which is, I suppose, to Boyo, is about, is NUMSA also now organizing at some of the coal mines? And what is happening in terms of levels of employment in Eskom? If we take over the last 5 years, have we seen a steady decline in numbers, or has it been stable, or has it been growth?
Okay.
Looking at, I can ask more questions.
No, I can see you did in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. 3 questions. No, brother. Jamaica, and then Bungi.
Morning, I'm Tembeka, also from AITC. I'm a branch subordinate. So,
You can't ask more than.
Yes. So mine is one, which is the daughter. So the governance issues, I think this may be referring to both speakers, but yeah, Salim, you will see when to answer. But the governance issues at Eskom, will this arrangement, I mean, which is more, sounds like more progressive, I think, will in this arrangement BEE procurement issues, BEE involvement at Eskom, and procurement issues still be involved or addressed in that kind of arrangement, ideal arrangement? Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so you got that one, huh? Okay, Bungi, yeah.
My name is Bongi. Thanks for presentation. I'm coming from NUMSA. I've got one small question from Sabian. I heard the viewer, Comrade viewer here mentioning about 15.7 billion balance in financial aid. And I heard the Sabian talking about the retrenchment of employees, about 70,000 people. Is there a need of retrenchment if Eskom is making profit? Yes.
Okay, thanks, Bongi. Okay, let's take those 4, Salim and Vuyo, and then there is a next round comrade from Tips. There's Daniel, there's Matandwa, and then there's Dave.
Okay, all very good questions. I don't know if I can do justice to all of them, but I'll try to answer them as best as I can. I think let's separate the input cost of coal. I mean, I think there are geological issues, there's a whole set of issues, the way the contracting is happening, which the long-term contracts are being replaced by short-term and medium-term contracts, and that involves a cost. And when you're dealing with smaller players, you've got to subsidize some of the cost of it, because you're going to try to promote a different segment to widen the scope of the industry from larger players to so on. But the fact is that the largest contribution comes from the 6 top big companies.
Yeah. You know, they say, please, your ringtone also exposes who you are. So it helps to switch off your phone, because
We also switch off the air conditioning. It's very hard to
Yeah, okay, let's do that. But yeah, you see now that song I don't know if ever heard it. Hey Jehovah, Jehovah, Jehovah. You know, it introduces. Okay, continue up on the code. Yeah.
So I'm not totally au fait on the contract structure, what's happening to cost plus contracts, because they usually longer term contracts, and they would usually come with better deals, let's put it this way. Then there would be long contracts which are not cost plus, that would also come with a much better pricing of the coal. And then you've got definitely increases up to 50% of the increase in the cost has come from 50% of the coal supply is shifted to smaller and medium-term contractors. So that's contributed to, as we understand it, contributed to the overall increase in cost of coal. The question around the IPP power purchase agreements, yes, we've had an auction system. If you look at the pricing of renewables from the first round down to the fourth round, you could definitely see a big shift in the prices. The question arises is how much of a surplus profit is being made by the companies. I cannot tell because it's very difficult unless you have the financial analysis and Excel sheet to be able to look at it. But the auction pricing certainly has definitely reduced it has increased the competitiveness of the IPPs, and it's certainly reduced the pricing, which I would say is in most of the arguments being presented by experts is that both wind and PV have come down radically. The average cost of electricity from IPPs is higher than that of that which is generated by coal at the present moment. But you've got to look at the blended price.
Do you know the margin though?
The margin, I would say the average, if I can guess, is around 70 cents a kilowatt for coal, because it's dealing with old plants that have been amortized. They're well in their 30s already. But remember, these plants are also very old. If you look at the newer coal plants, we're looking at much higher cost, even above the current IPP pricing. So in the blended price, you get to 90 cents a kilowatt. If you include the levy, the price of whatever renewables, I think what's it, 2,000 now or 3,000 megawatts that's been generated, and using the old coal plants, including the blended price is around 90 cents. So it's a bit complicated in terms of how you understand different generation costs. Okay, so the blended price also includes transmission and distribution. So there's a portion of that. So we're not dealing with pure generation costs. We're actually taking into account T&D costs as well, plus the generation costs. I think that if you were to look at, because of the cost overruns of coal, if you look at the future, if you look at the cost of Medupi and Kusile with the kind of pricing of coal, it's certainly going to be the case that whether there's big profits being made out of renewables or not, the renewables will come at much cheaper cost. I mean, that's going to be the de facto situation. So what we've certainly seen, certainly from the analysis I've done, is that there's been, I think there's going to be a consolidation in the IPP industry. We've definitely seen big players like Enel, Mainstream and others come into the market. When I spoke to some of them, they are looking to expand, because many of these companies, what they do is they work on overall asset base globally. So their finances are aggregation of all of the assets around it. For each generation, they have a rate of return on the equity and on the debt. What we often miss is that these companies are also listed. So they might go very low on the actual of the corporate balance sheet rather than project financing, they can get better financing deals because their credit ratings are in fact better than Eskom. So if they raise money on the capital markets, if they were to finance this on their own balance sheets, they can definitely do it at much better rates than even Eskom could, because of the nature of their credit ratings and their ability to finance it from their own cash flow. But what happens is that because these companies are listed, their overall profitability based on their aggregate assets, this is where they make the money from financial part of the company. In other words, the listed part of the company is based on the performance and the value of the assets. They don't often reflect the true value. So if the value is 10 rand on a listed entity, it might be 2-3 times more, just based on expectations of return in the long term. So this is how I think they improve the profitability of entering into a market like South Africa. So they might go at IPPs at much competitive rates because they can afford to do so, but they make their money on the financialized side. Through financial instruments, they able to generate very competitive capital through corporate bonds. They able to make better returns on the listed entity, and this is how they, my sense of it is how they are able to make their profit. So their profit might not be at the project level, but at the financialized side of the operation. That's really what I want to point out. I don't have a full grasp of cost plus mines. My understanding is that the original arrangements, if you go back to the mine history, maybe it's 30 years back or 20 years back, these mines were planned in conjunction with the power stations. Remember, we had a dual pricing system at the time. It was actually regulated. The government set the price for Eskom at a certain level, and the rest of the coal could be exported, whatever surplus, onto the market. That dual pricing mechanism has collapsed. It's now one market, and Eskom is competing effectively in a global integrated market that is determined largely by export prices. These cost plus mines, the arrangement was probably that Eskom would get a preferential rate on the condition that if they were operating or recapitalization cost, which is the plus component, that exceeded the original estimation, because as you dig deeper into the coal seams, there's some level of uncertainty on the quality of the coal, the level of effort that is required to strip off the coal, and there might be other infrastructure needs that were not anticipated. So this is how cost plus, in my very simplistic understanding of it, works. So because the coal resources in that particular mine is declining over time, it's clear that the actual cost of actually digging out the coal is going to be cost more, and it's likely that what they're digging out is also a lot more. The quality of the coal is lower, and this is probably this is the deal that they've arranged. Okay, so it doesn't make it profitable for the company to invest, largely maybe because it also feels that even if we were to export all the coal on the coal market, it would not be able to run the mine on a profitable basis. But I do know that Exxaro, for instance, in the Grootgeluk mine out in the Waterberg area, is actually at the moment exporting most of its coal because there is actually a market for bad coal. To India, places, even parts of China, and so on. And this is probably why they don't need, in the case of Exxaro, they can do with the way they're currently running things. I'm going to leave the rest of the stuff. There was something about governance issues. I think everybody accepts that even if you run in the NGO, you need good governance. It doesn't only have to be Eskom. I think that's clear. Question is whether good governance leads to democratic decision making. That's another story, because you can have good governance and autocracy living side by side. But we should all accept that good governance is important. I think what one should also accept that there is there's a policy decision to go BEE. But there's also a political economy around it. There's a lot of people lobbying for contracts and special deals and trying to subvert the governance system, as we saw with the Guptas and others, not just the Guptas, by the way, that try to exploit the policy framework exclusively for. So we must distinguish between whether the policy framework is good or bad and what happens behind the policy framework in the companies securing those deals. I think I'll leave it there. I think Vuyo, if you want to answer.
Vuyo.
I've got 4 questions I identified.
Yeah, okay.
That will be interesting. The first question is around the profit from going through the IPPs, which was observed on appeal team. What we indicated comment is that in terms of the results from Eskom, there's no profit this year. And for the first time that Eskom is not making any profit in any year for a long time, in terms of its financial results. Only what I was talking about was cash flow. The 15.7 billion, it's not profit. And Eskom, just to emphasize, is in a difficult financial position as we speak today. The other question was around, I think, Brian, around Eskom jobs, manpower, headcount over 5 years. In 2015 financial year, Eskom lost about 2,000 employees through voluntary separation packages that were offered by Eskom unilaterally. And basically, the headcount has been around, well, there's a problem about Eskom as a company and Eskom as a group. So people sometimes conflate the numbers. But the headcount over the past 5 years has not increased. I think the stabilized to stay almost the same level, around 45, 47,000 for the whole group, including subsidiaries rotate. So to say Eskom is rotated and I mean the headcount isn't, it can go over the years, more than 5 years or more. You asked about coal mining. Yes, in mining, NUMSA is extended scopes, we're recruiting, but NUM is still a dominant majority union in that sector. And we try to find our way into the coal mining. But we have a few companies, a few coals, and a few strikes. One was in Glencoe 4 weeks ago in Pumalanga. But NUM, I think, is still dominant. Those are the questions that came, I don't remember that they were first. You raised the question of governance, something that can be raised. Not much to do with actually then. Yeah.
Okay. I'll open it up to there are questions that are remaining from that, but let's get moving, because I think the other people are itching to put their issues. I've noted some of those. I mean, I'll like Brian about the long-term contracts. So they're not lost. If we through this round, and I'll open it up to other people who are in the room who may know about some of these. But let's get.
Good morning. I'm Bhavna from TIPS. Thank you both for the information and input. I just have a question of clarity from an environmental and trade perspective. It was mentioned earlier that coal jobs would need to be maintained and that coal will still be part of the energy mix. Does this mean that coal production would be indefinite, or do you foresee a complete phasing out of coal eventually sometime in the future? I'm just wondering, in terms of international trade standards and carbon taxes, very soon industries and companies will be assigning emission costs to their inputs. And if we are producing goods for export based on coal-powered electricity, this could undermine trade in terms of trade sanctions and industries choosing not to trade with South Africa. So will coal be still part of the energy mix in the future?
Okay. Daniel?
Yeah, I am not from this country, so sorry for my question to your knowledge. But I had a question about tariffs because you mentioned that cheaper renewables don't necessarily mean cheaper tariffs. That's something that we have seen in many countries. And we have also seen that with cheaper renewables, we also get quite often more inequality because the burden of the higher tariffs goes to the residential consumer, while the big industrial consumer pay much less. So we see that in South Africa. And the second part of my question has to do with that. What's the role of the big industrial consumer in shaping Eskom policy? Because what we have seen in some countries is that this guy have a lot of influence on policy making in the field of energy. And in some cases, the big energy consumers also become IPP themselves. So it's a win-win situation for them because they get cheaper energy and they also sell the surplus energy to the grid, making a profit. Can we see that in South Africa or it's not in the future?
Very, very.
All right, Batano.
Thanks. I'm Batano from Sandwich. Let's acknowledge the presentation you were here at one of the sites and from a person like me from another sector. I've got another perspective of what's going on in the energy sector. Thank you very much. My questions of clarity are two, but the first one have already been asked by Comrade Bogi. I'm not going to repeat it. And the other one, Comrade will alluded to the fact that they've seen the financial statement, the financial statement of Eskom. My clarification is on the liquidation part. Can we conclude to say that Eskom will be liquidated? And if that is the case, are there any measures put in place to arrest that situation? Then the last question is around, which I missed in both presentations, is around the whole issue of load trading. Because from another sector, but there was this thing which I regard as a crisis as well, of load shedding. Will you be willing to share some light on that? Was it really something that was not even there? Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Batana. Richard, remember you are in the stage now. You're in the floor.
Thanks also for the presentations, David. Sorry.
Sorry for disagreeing. Are we allowed, for example, there was a question, then there was a discussion.
Yeah.
Now we want to enter that
Yeah.
discussion.
You'll have the opportunity to enter. I'll open it up. Just hold. I'll open it up. Dave?
Yes, David Figg, independent researcher. Thank you for the presentations. I think the trickiest issue for this, for the people, for everyone attending this meeting, is really the future of coal and how we relate to that. And so, to amplify the question from our sister earlier on, to what extent do we understand the global coal economy? And to what extent is the IRP that's just been issued a good response to that? And do we need further studies where we can estimate the trends and the way in which the future of coal is being posed? Because if coal is to be phased out in the long run, is that something that we have agency to determine, or is it being determined by outside forces? Can we shape that, or is it an inevitability that we have to accommodate to whether we like it or not?
Okay. Will, any take on this? And then I'll come to Salim. And then before I get overthrown as a dictatorial chair, I would open it up because there may be other people in the room who have to what has been asked now. Yeah.
Yes, it's just take a few of the questions from it, starting with Batalga on the load shedding. I'm not sure if I want to question fully, but here's a response. Load shedding is a mechanism designed by Eskom and I think utilities to balance the supply and demand of electricity. When there's too much capacity or supply available and there's too much high demand, so they need to balance so that the system does not trip or collapse and cause blackouts and all those things. And we've learned that some of it has been made in terms of the director's reports that we have received from Eskom investigations. And some of our members in Eskom, they've indicated that they defied with management sometimes, being senior managers, not as members. They've defied with Eskom management or executives when they wanted to is necessary. That is used to balance supply and demand. You talk about liquidity or liquidation, possible potential imminent liquidation of Eskom. That, as far as we know, has not come to our attention. We're talking about liquidity that needs to pay or Eskom to pay its short-term obligations in terms of money. There are challenges, but liquidation is not the level or the extent that we are at or that we are informed of around that issue. The other issue that was raised was from Barbara Tips and the fee on the coal production. As NUMSA, we're very clear that South Africa has got commitments they've made on climate change and emissions and reduction and mitigations. But there is agreements that the Paris Agreement. We prepared a business agreement that we make sure that those commitments are met in terms of the coal production and coal emissions. We're clear about that. And the issue of climate change or the climate catastrophe is not negotiable. Okay? It's there and it's accepted. We just need to work within and live within those means to make sure it doesn't get worse than anticipated. We're very clear about that. On the question of pricing, Sean, that you raised, and I think the point that was raised also by in the presentation by Comrade Tokia. We agree that the cheaper cost and prices, and tariffs for renewables might not mean that development and progress is passed on to the customer and the consumers. We are aware of that because the South System works. But the point is that a different Eskom or a different tariff regime, tariff pricing has to reduce the tariff prices for consumers. We have to work around that so that we make the point I think that Daniel is making. We need to make sure that electricity pricing is affordable, is accessible, and is low. So everything that we do is within that. And we're saying as NUMSA, IPP is too expensive, what they're charging customers. Through Eskom's global mechanisms, from the RCA.
I'll try to be brief because I think most viewers answered most of the questions. But I just wanted to share an insight around the tariffs. When we talk about Eskom prices, we talk about wholesale prices. Okay? And there's often special prices for the industries, but I'm not sure in the situation with BHP Billiton. I understand there's negotiations to look at special pricing for energy-intensive user groups. But you've got to distinguish that for what happens at the municipal level. So the municipalities receive a bulk supply, they then sell it on to the consumers. And the way most municipalities operate, which is unfortunate, is that they're highly dependent on the sales of electricity for their revenue. But if you look at the rate of pricing in the current, let's say since the load shedding, the prices have skyrocketed. People can pay up to 2 rand a kilowatt, depending on where they are, compared to what the wholesale price is. You can see the surplus. You raised a very insightful comment about large industry players. My view is that industry players are using Eskom now as a backup, rather than the major supply of electricity. In fact, they would want to sell back to Eskom because they can actually generate it at much cheaper cost without incurring all the headache of the systems cost. They will become players. There's already lots of mining companies that are doing that. In fact, Cecil, when I was meeting with Cecil, I joked, it looks like you're becoming a utility, and they kind of gave me that sheepish smile, which is basically what they're doing, because in some of the municipalities, actually like in the Cecilburg or wherever, the municipalities are not functional. So Cecil is going to play a major role in actually supplying electricity to local players here, because partly it's got to meet its own socio-economic obligations in those towns. So it's basically, essentially taking over the municipality. So I do see that scenario playing itself out in South Africa. On the future of coal, I think there's lots of good work done by the IEA. They do an annual report on it. You can get very good statistics on what's going on. I would say that next 20, 30 years, there will be probably a tapering of coal demand and a lot more push for gas into the market. Also, we're finding that in the latest IEA report, that actual capitalization of renewables is also starting to slow down. So that's a very interesting development. Eskom can be liquidated, but it can be insolvent, but it will never be liquidated. I really need to recognize that. It's already insolvent. In other words, it's operating with no money, but it knows that it can capture government and the treasury, and will always get a bailout. I'll leave it there.
Okay. I think we should, there was Richard's hand, and there is Bram who's itching to enter the discussion. So, from what I have in my notes, there is the question, a cluster of issues that have emerged around the cost drivers. I mean, there's been some explanation and all of that, but maybe some people want to come in to add on that. And the initial question, if I got from Sean, is that what is it? Is it coal? Is that the uptake of renewables? And what's the ratio? What is the weighting in this rising price? And that's the question that maybe hasn't been, because I mean, I haven't seen the latest MOIPD application but if you look at the formula, it says PE, which is primary energy, and then it gets broken down into different components. And I think the question is, when we look at that as a cost driver, what's the weight? Because we can have a false sometimes and talk at cross purposes about, it is the IPPs and is it the coal? So we need to get to grips with that. And we may not do it in this session, but it's important that we when we argue publicly, we're quite clear about that. So there's that as a first question, and I think it would be important for people who come in to either open and say things on that. The second area, I'm just putting up broad areas that have come up. The second broad area is the issue of coal contracts, and comrades have mentioned about that. And I think it's been broadened about the political economy of coal. And it's the contract, it's the global situation, and a little bit of the history about how it was done before and how that got abandoned. So that's for me a second sort of a broad area. The third area which is important, I just call that the finance. And I think yesterday there was sort of issues about how do we solve or suggestions about the financing challenges. And it's nice because we are in a room now. It's not on TV and in front of the cameras. The union is saying, we've seen the books and the situation is dire. And what can we do about it? So that's a third area that I thought is important. And then fourthly, and I mean this is not in any order, there's clearly the issue of, I mean we didn't speak about the issue of governance, of utilities, and how maybe there are proposals or comments on that. And yeah, I mean, I would, I mean, that's not exhaustive, but from my notes, I mean, Brian, there is the point which has not been answered directly, and maybe comrades can confirm. The last time I was in a meeting about the contracts and the PHP one, that was the only remaining special contract, and there were still disputes about that. And the government was, and NERSA were going to take it to court. But all the other sort of contracts with sort of big corporations have been, in terms of the tariff structure and tariff system, have been moved into that. It was the PHB bulletin one that was remaining, and there were still disputes, and government was saying they're going to litigate on that one. But I've been out of the energy space for a while now, so I may miss something. But
welcome back.
Okay, comrades, can we? I'm gonna, if there's no other broad areas to the suggestion, I would want us now to zoom in. I know Richard, you're the first one to go now, but I would want or suggest that comrades speak on this question of the cost drivers and any comments or input that they want to make that, and we spend 5 minutes, and then we're going to move through the other broad areas. Richard?
Thanks, Comrade Chair.
Okay.
It's a question, and it relates to the way that Eskom gets its return on investment through the tariff or the market price determination. So, my understanding is that over recent, I don't know what period, but recently Eskom has had its asset base revalued. So the asset base value has been increased something like threefold over a couple of years. The rate of return on assets is obviously a lot higher when you rate your assets higher, because the rate of return is based on what that. So given that we're trying to figure out what the role of the state-owned entity is, we need to know just how bad it is. And it seems that how bad it is being obscured by amplifying the asset value of Eskom, even though we know that the coal plants are not actually getting better, they're getting worse. So could you clarify what has happened with the asset base, and whether it might actually be obscuring just how bad the situation is?
Okay, I'm opening it up. Richard, just introduce yourself.
Sorry, Richard Worthington. I'm with Frederick Ibet Stiftung as of last month.
Consistency. All right, so Honora. Yeah.
I have a question here. You mentioned that one of the objectives of the council is to protect the transport. I have a concern. I'm from a local government background. I work for the city of Tshwane. What happens is the city of Tshwane purchases electricity from Eskom, and then they sell it to us. But at the end of the day, you hear that the municipalities owes Eskom billions and billions of dollars.
So I don't understand how it happens again. So I wanted to know what inspired the arrangement between local government and Eskom. That Eskom has sell electricity to the city, and the city sells electricity to us. And my next question is that it is not possible to break away from that arrangement, because if we, as the community in the city of Tshwane, we owe billions to the city, then the city owns billions to Eskom. Would it not be better if that billions are owed, we owe directly to Eskom, that we purchase directly from Eskom, then we cut this middleman fee, because they buy electricity lesser from you, sell it at a higher price to us, but at the end of the day, they still own you. So don't you think these billions will help to protect the jobs of the workers?
All right, Nora. Yeah, Pram, I can see you've been, yeah. Okay. Comrade Pram?
Thank you, Comrade. No, just to take on what has been already said, because Comrade Salim said a lot of things, but on this first round, I'm not going to dwell much on what you've already said, because I want to enter on the second round. But I'm going to tie up with Comrade Sean what has already said regarding the composition of tariffs when it comes to Eskom and also the IPPs. Now, if you go to 2017 reports and also the financial statements, you'll understand that Eskom has spent 60 billion to make, I think, 220 gigawatts of energy. Now, if you go to the cents per kilowatt, that will amount to 27 cents 0.56. Now, if you go to the IPPs, when they went to purchase, the standard average price, it was R1.88. So I just wanted to clear that for the first moment. Now, the reason why I'm highlighting R1.88, this is the average price. Between the one PVs today prices, I think it's R3.8. R3.8. But now when you...
What was the price today? Sorry?
R3.80.
Sorry, my ears are bad.
Oh, all right.
Sorry.
But now when you have to also combine with the wind that was around R1.61 during that period, it goes down to that average of R1.88. That was 2017, but today I think the average is R2.22. Now the Eskom standard average price, which is a standard way of assessing the lesser tariff application, it's 85 cents. So that's the standard average price for Eskom. It's 85 cents in today's terms. Now Eskom on average is buying from IPPs at R2.22, because we have to average from the maximum, which is your PVs and your CSP technology. CSP is even more during the peak, as was already said yesterday. So it goes up to that R2, you understand? So that's what he said also, that it doesn't mean that when we add more renewables, even a cheaper price is going to go down. Because we are looking at how many projects, I think it's 93 projects. And the only projects that maybe they've got competitive prices, I think it's less than 10. Those that are 77 cents, that's the recent win in bid window 4. You understand? So, but mostly they are sitting up there, I think 2 and 3 times more the standard average price of Eskom. Now, the second issue that I wanted to touch on is the issue of the composition. Now, in terms of the total generated energy by Eskom, as I've said, Eskom has got internal generation, which is your coal, nuclear, OCGT, pump storage, that is 220 gigawatt hours for 2017. Now, if you are going to add the imports and also the IPP purchases, it goes to 240. Now you've got an additional of plus minus 20 gigawatt hours that comes from the imports and also the IPPs. You understand? So now that's why I came to that average of 188 for 2017 and also 222 for 2018. Now, the catch in there is that in terms of contribution, the IPPs, they are contributing to the total of 240. It's 4.8%. But in terms of cost, it's 35% of the primary energy cost. because Eskom in 2017 has spent 21 billion, purchasing only 4.8% of the contribution from the IPPs. So for as long as that balance is still not there, because seemingly the value of that electricity that we buy from the IPPs, it's something that we have to look at it, because you cannot be spending 35% of your primary energy budget purchasing only less than 5% of your total generated electricity. You understand? So I just wanted to highlight that on the first round. Otherwise, Comrade Salim has said many things that I want to touch on. Like, for example,
Don't be polite enough. Just say, as you say in the union, you want to contest them. don't be. Okay. All right.
Cost plus minus.
Okay.
Yes, the cost plus minus, how I understand them, is that Eskom, for example, they enter an agreement with the coal company that is going to supply them, let's say, 1.5 million tons of coal per month. Now, as we are moving closer, maybe to the mid-year or moving closer also to the end of the year of the contract, is that those companies, they cannot meet those obligations. Now, they need to be financed by Eskom. That's why you'll understand their price, their rent per ton, it's always lower, because Eskom must finance their capital expenditure to ensure that they meet the agreed rent per ton. You see? So now you'll understand that now there's a shortage. Mostly what has happened between the past 10 years is that those companies now, they cannot meet that agreement in terms of delivering a certain tons per month. So what Eskom does, they will have to supplement at a much higher price from short term and medium term. So that's what has led to Comrade Salim saying that the price per ton, it has risen to 500. So it's part of supplementing, because Eskom, under the current perilous financial position, they cannot finance those companies. You understand? So I thought, let me stop there for the first round. Otherwise, there are so many things I will discuss in the second one.
Okay. The second round. Okay. Right. Brown. There were without any other. There was two questions. There was the question about the methodology of evaluation of asset, which came from Richard, which is also important in the pricing formula, because that's the question of how the assets in Eskom are valued. So that's anyone who wants to take that one. The second question is Nora's question about the municipality and distribution and the surcharges that municipalities put on electricity. What do you work in distribution, is that? No, okay. So then you want to take the valuation question?
I don't know if we can answer, but current asset values are 770 billion. I think it's, what does it reflect? It reflects transmission, distribution, infrastructure, new coal plants, facilities, buildings, and so on. And I understand that the methodology for MYPD4, there's a new methodology of actually asset, reflecting the asset base. I don't know what the rate of return is, whether they aggregate it or they assign it to a particular thing, because most of the running assets of generation is already depreciating. It's we have to replace those assets with new ones. I just want to say two things around the pricing issue, because it's a bit of a fudge at the moment. So if you got older plants and you're generating electricity from an asset that is already paid for, it's the average cost of generating that electricity is definitely going to be lower. Okay, even if the cost of coal go up. So to say 12,000 megawatts you generate at cheaper cost, because in today's time, largely when you've already paid the cost of that asset already, if you're bringing in new assets like renewables into that, they will definitely reflect a higher cost, because you've got to amortize them over a new period. As I said earlier, the average cost is largely higher for renewables at the moment because we're dealing with auction prices in the first and second round were much higher, and they definitely declining over time. We've got to look at and we're going to judge those costs against new coal, like Majuba and Kusile. And when we start getting an impression of those prices, we'll see that the average cost of generation from coal will definitely, I mean, it's a debate. Average cost of running those coal plants is definitely going to be higher over the long term, and the cost of renewables is going to go down. So I think we at the moment we're dealing with a fudging of the cost because we're blending old depreciated costs with new assets. It doesn't reflect. If we were to take that 12,000 gigawatts off the grid, then everything is going to go up from the new coal. So we just need to put that in perspective a little bit.
Richard, I understood. I mean, you put that as a clarity question, but there's been, as we know, there's been a debate, if I understand it properly, about the methodology being used for the price determination. And the bulk of that is how the assets value of the assets are attached. And that in the discussion paper on reviewing the methodology, different alternatives were made, which would allow or will make Eskom, when they make the application, not to be asking for the high tariff they ask. Is that the debate that you're entering, or am I hearing something? I mean, it will be important to put that in here if that's the issue, even if we're not resolving it now, but to flag it.
Well, it's not the issue I was raising. The issue I was raising was just how bad is the situation with Eskom at the moment, because if we're trying to figure out whether we can expect Eskom to be the platform for renewable energy industries in South Africa, or whether we need something else. They mentioned possibly a new one. Then we need to know just how bad it is. And there's a lot of reportage that is suggesting that it's worse than anyone is prepared to admit. And one of the ways of hiding it is through, but I don't know enough about it to know if it really is the case.
Okay, let me not smuggle something that's not been put on the table. There is a question from Nora about the municipal, I mean, the fact that, I mean, in Salim's input, the question of, and Vuyo's one, there was the issue of Eskom being owed by municipalities, and the amounts were mentioned. Now, Nora is coming from a consumer point of view, and as also a local government employee and a unionist about the role of municipalities in this, and the fact that sometimes you find in South Africa, sometimes once the environmental groups and some will be critical of Eskom, you find communities marching to be connected to Eskom and to be supplied by Eskom than the municipality. I think that the overthrow of the mayor in Salt Lake in Kimberley is linked to this, which has happened in the last few days, through mass action. So I think someone needs to just maybe answer Nora.
Yeah.
Okay. Morning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Firstly, I must apologize that you're saying that I'm getting out. I'm going to say that Dr. I'll be coming back.
Okay.
I'm not sure. But, the first part in answering a question is the issue reticulation of these services, water and electricity, being constitutionally, according to the municipalities, they say it's them that were supposed to reticulate, to distribute electricity and charge for it. But in certain places, we have an arrangement where, of course, the municipalities say we rather must buy the electricity and reticulate according to the law. But here's the challenge. The challenge is with and I just want to, when answering that question, I must also make an input here to say, we do believe that the municipalities also survive on voted budgets, which means electricity is budgeted for whatever. And I hear my comrade saying it is higher, but there is budget that gets budgeted for the electricity. There is budget that even for free basic electricity, everything is budgeted for. In essence, for Eskom, what was supposed to happen completely with the 15 billion or thereabout that is owed, when the budgets are passed, if we were not deliberate, if the government was not deliberate in making the shamble finance to go on at Eskom, they were going to pass the budget and say, let's pass the monies that are owed directly from Treasury to Eskom, so that they don't let it to die, because I do believe that when you pass a budget and you pass the money, the 15 billion we are talking about was not going to be even an issue. But to answer you direct, the issue of municipality articulating, whether we disagree with the prices being high or we agree with the prices being high, it's not an issue. The issue is they do their markup. They also want, they make money out of the deal of buying electricity from Eskom. And they protect it with the law. And if you would remember, Comrade, at the time when there was the issue of mention of RED, Regional Electricity Distribution Arrangement, the government of Western Cape, which challenged and said, but look, the issue of reticulation indeed is supposed to be the reticulation of electricity and basic services needs to be our domain. It doesn't have to be the domain of Eskom. Eskom need not be a player there. So with regards to that, I think we are stuck where we are at because we couldn't establish the rights. If we establish the rights, we're going to move from the municipality and Eskom buying from each other and selling at higher price. I think that is the long and short of it, and if Comrade Puyo must add, it will still be fine.
Okay. All right, comrades, I'm looking for, I mean, not that there is a long story. There's a long story that goes back to the Energy White Paper of 1998, the proposed rationalization of a fragmented distribution sector through the establishment of regional electricity distributors called the REDs. And big fight about that, and the idea was to get away from the different tariffs at that level. As the board was saying, there was an attempt to establish that, and the municipalities and their right to reticulation, they claimed it to the constitution, and politically they mobilized, and the story that when there was the National General Council of the ANC, some of the mayors in the metro, they met in a hotel in Durban and said this bill on REDs must be killed, and that's how it got killed, so that they can remain with the question of the REDs to do. But let's say, and this also divided the union movement about the REDs, was the municipal unions were for REDs, and those that in the vertically integrated were for maintaining some of the distribution. But maybe if we're out of this, and some of the necessary work that's necessary for unions in the municipal level and those in the utility to start talking about some of those that history can be dug up as we look forward for solutions. But it's a.
I can read some stats for you.
Okay.
It's really interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll just do it quickly.
And I'm looking for hands. Okay.
The current 2018 and 19 NERSA decision, total regulated expenditure is 190 billion. And in 2021 to 22, it's going to increase to 291. Current debt is around 53 billion.
I'm not sure what are you referring to?
No, I'm talking about NERSA application for the next, right up to 2022. Okay? So it's 190 is moving to 290.
Eskom application.
Yeah. The cost of actually running it. Okay.
190 present.
No, the application is for 190. It will increase to 291. The debt is currently 53 billion. It will increase to 101. By
$52 billion.
Rand.
52, not 388.
No. On a yearly basis. Yeah. So that 290 will add to the 380 will be 600. That's how the 600 comes from. Renewables IPP cost will be 27, will increase to 42. I did a calculation, it's about 14% of total cost. Primary energy is 59, will increase to 85 billion. And operating costs will increase from 51 to 63. That's what they estimate. Whether they're going to get the application for what they expect the cost to be, that's a different story.
All right. Okay. Let's do this. There's Mateus and Richard, number 2. But I'm gonna give you Tasneem because this end isn't coming. So I'm jumping. Tasneem, you start there. But I'll come to you.
No, mine is just a question about the proposals or the
introduction.
Sorry. My name is Tasneem Eskom. About the moves afoot about the Chinese buying up of Eskom's debt and how that impacts on the supposed state-controlled utility. This is a foreign, basically a foreign-owned, maybe even, the control and ownership of Eskom then comes into question.
Okay. Thanks, Mateo.
Amanda. Amanda. I'm not going to say Amanda. Thanks, Congress. Earlier on, you touched on the importance of democratizing, particularly Eskom itself, and making sure that workers and communities are playing a role. I think that's where the aspect of the local municipalities also needs to be discussed as well. In the process of democratizing, we've got a serious challenge. At the moment, most of the municipalities have been paralyzed in one way or another. And given the fact that municipalities continue to budget on the basis of the number of consumers, that is the properties that they have. So they estimate, they project their budget. And once they've done that, they try to actually strive towards meeting or reaching that budget. And unfortunately, the situation that we have in our communities is that where most community members, realizing that the municipalities are corrupt, the municipalities are paralyzed, they are actually not paying for the consumed electricity. And we also have a situation where even local businesses are stealing the electricity from municipalities. And the debt owed to Eskom keeps on increasing. So in the case of Emalahleni, there's been a lot of debates about this. And to a point of saying, some communities are saying we are actually not indebted to Eskom. Eskom is indebted to Emalahli because of the environmental conditions that we live in today. So it's a subject that we need to actually start discuss in relation to renewable energy. Because that's where I think the importance of, when you democratize, what will be the role of the local government in, advancing renewable energy, in the just transition as well? What will be their role? I understand my comment when you say it's coming from the municipal workers in the Malaki, or in most municipalities, are the ones that have been sent out by municipalities when they're supposed to do cut-offs. And those are the ones that are becoming victims of community action. Because what the communities do, they wait for the workers to come and they chase them away. They throw stones. Some of them get injured. So these are some of the issues that we need to discuss. Well, also the pricing. In reality is that the coal producing companies, or the companies that are actually supplying Eskom with coal, are also the ones that are also eating on the budgets of local municipalities. So these are some of the aspects that you need, because remember the tax that are running in and around our towns and cities are causing a huge damage in one way or another. Those costs are not costs that are included in calculating all of it. So all of them are these are costs that have been excluded. So I just wanted to make that intervention.
All right. Thanks, Mateo. All right. There was Richard number 2. Huh? Am I right?
Yeah. Well, number 1, it depends which way you think about it.
Okay. You can upgrade yourself. Okay. You second in the round. Yeah. Okay.
Just a quick one on there's been quite a lot of discussion about the pricing, and I don't want to get into all the details, but if you read media articles, it's very clear that people cherry pick pricing to suit what agenda they're pushing. And if you are comparing one price with another that is actually measuring a different thing, it's not really fair. So if you're comparing Eskom costs where all the assets are paid off compared to renewables where you're still paying off the asset, they're very different. It's like saying, oh, it's cheaper to rent a house than to buy a house, but at the end of the day, if you're buying a house, you have a house rather than nothing. So without getting into the details, I think whenever we see numbers, just ask the question, are you comparing like with like, and then move on from there. But in terms of Eskom, even if Santa Claus arrived and said, here's free energy, you have no energy costs, so you can take out all the prices, we still have all this debt. So, for energy planning, the IRP, you want to look at the least cost model going forward, but we still need to work out how Eskom deals with all the debt they have regardless of new costs. So that's, I think, the bigger question as to how to deal with Eskom.
All right. Sandra, before you went up, you had a hand up. I'm trying to be fair. She had a hand up and she's forgotten it. Okay. Someone, Pram and Ram, and then we close here.
Okay, no. I will start with the pricing first of all. Comrade Samuel responded and Comrade Tushar responded. But I just need to clarify something. The formula for allowed revenue, it includes the depreciation expense. It's there. That's why we said the standard average price of Eskom, it's 85 cents as per 31st March 2018. Now, the reason why I've quoted 27 cents per kilowatt hour of Eskom internal generation is because it doesn't include everything else. That will be your depreciation expense, your M&O expense, and everything else. So I just wanted to clarify that we are comparing apples with apples. When we say Eskom is selling at 85 cents per kilowatt hour, we know it's NESA who said so, it's Eskom who said so, no one else. We're not pushing anything to suit anyone. Now, let me move on to Comrade Samuel. I mean, he structured his presentation well, and he touched on many issues of finance. And looking at also the theme, you said coming to terms with the current crisis at Eskom. I think we won't be doing justice if we're not going to cover the finance cost that he mentioned. There is a challenge, and the challenge, it's not new. One would remember that 1974,
to a period of 1982, there was a period of the same nature that Eskom suffered. But in that period, they instituted a dividends commission to look into Eskom problems. And when you look at the recommendations from that period, it's exactly the same trap that Eskom fell into. Because now you have to go back from 2006, 2007 to understand why are we in this situation of high debt levels. Because the forecasting that was done to say the GDP growth is going to grow at this rate, the energy that we will need in terms of the peak demand at this rate didn't materialize from 2007. And now what we're seeing is that the peak demand is less than 10 years or 12 years ago. So this is one of the things that we're discussing in the debates, but to say you have over-forecasted, you've went to borrow to overbuild. That's why today there are discussions to say the tariffs are not cost-effective. Now ask yourself, they are not cost-effective of what? Because South Africans are saying we need 35 in terms of peak demand for this 35,000 megawatts, and Eskom total capacity is 50,000 megawatts. So we're paying for something that we don't need actually. That's why I raised the issue yesterday of the focusing of IRP, because we'll end up building again for something that we don't need. So I said, let me touch again on the issue of finance. If you look at the annual financial statement of Eskom, now if you're going to look at it from a liquidity position, if you are going to draw up a plan of principal debt redemption, Eskom from now on up until 2028, they will have to pay, that will include now interest and debt redemption, 400 billion. So on an average per year, they will need 40 billion. And that excludes your 72 billion that we mentioned. That excludes the borrowing plan starting from 2017 up to 2022, which is 388 billion. So that 388 billion, that is say the debt that we have now, is going to increase to 600 billion, and now it's still going to increase. So one of the issues that Eskom is facing is the rising debt that Eskom, within a period of a year or so, will find it difficult to service that debt. Because we went to borrow, I mean, they are consultants who advise the board apparently during the period of 2007. And also the IRP is still the same assumptions. That's why I was mentioning it yesterday, because we are falling into the same trap again. You understand? So one of the issues that we need to be looked at is the issue of debt, because you are building Medupi and Busle, let alone the renewables. I'm not even touching the additional capacity. Now, you've got declining sales. The declining sales emanates from your rising electricity tariffs. So when you say you are building, but your demand is going down, what are you actually doing? Because from 2012 till the period of 2017, Eskom didn't increase the demand in terms of sales. Now the revenue increased because of tariff increases. It jumped from 115 billion to 177 billion, only just purely tariff increases, not an increase in sales. So that is one of the problems that we have also. We have to grow the demand. You understand? So I just because of time, I wanted to touch on
Right? Yeah, we still have a day and tomorrow. So yeah, Brian.
I want to focus on two aspects. One is the financing issue. The financing cost of Eskom is a critical issue to resolving the crisis in Eskom. And so I think we need to do work on disaggregating those financing costs. What are the different interest rates that Eskom is paying in terms of its different creditors? And I think that's extremely important work that we need to do, because we've got to ask ourselves the question, why does Eskom go to the Chinese Development Bank, the same bank that's now taken over Sri Lanka's harbour as an outcome of the payment of its loans? But as I said yesterday, we've got other options in being able to finance Eskom at its debt at much lower levels of interest, again without affecting any government employees' pension. And I can share those details. I can prepare a little presentation just to show you what the interest coming into the government employees' pension fund is as compared compared to what interest rates Eskom is presently paying. But that's one area of work. I think there's a much bigger area of work, and there's a question that I asked Richard yesterday, maybe not in very coherent ways, is about the question of demand. The question, and I raised it in relation to previous period of surpluses, and now we say there's there's overcapacity, etc. There's not overcapacity if we use electricity to develop a different type of development strategy for this country. If our concern with Eskom is not about fixing it to be a profitable entity, but as an instrument for a transition to a low carbon economy, then we've got to ask ourselves, what are the energy needs of an expanded public transport system that is running on electricity as opposed to burning oil? Can we electrify our transport system and expand it? That is going to require huge amounts of additional generated electricity. Similarly, as I highlighted yesterday, we've got extreme levels of energy poverty in this country. We've got over 2 million households, people without homes. There's a shortage of homes. There's a mass housing program that needs to be built, and that requires us to put in expanded electricity and so on. We've got, I think it's 3 million households in rural areas with absolutely no electricity. So there's huge potential demand. The question is, can this demand be met without increasing the carbon intensity of our economy? Can we reduce our emissions, etc.? These are the things that I think, if we want to fix Eskom, we've got to ask ourselves, can it be an instrument towards that? Because otherwise, what are we talking about? We're talking about 40 to 50,000 workers in Eskom. We're talking about another 70 to 80,000 workers in coal mines. 130,000 workers, maybe another 50,000 in downstream industries. Aren't there 200,000 other jobs? Give them a decent income. You know, it's not rocket science to solve that problem. I think it requires us looking at it from a big picture point of view. And that's what I think we need to now move to in terms of this debate.
Okay, I can see Sebastian, you want to, yeah.
30 seconds.
Yeah.
I think what Brian is saying, I mean, we have a third priority. You need to know the terms of this Chinese law, because basically what you are doing with this size of debt that you're having, you're getting more debt in order to pay this debt. And I don't know the terms, but this is what you're doing. I'm sure about that. They can tell you that they are going, to restructure the power station or whatever. This is nonsense. What you're doing with this short-term loan is to pay more debt, and you're getting, of course, more in debt. This is one thing. And the second thing is that from our experience in Latin America, in the Americas, the Chinese are not building the first refinery in Brazil. Why? Because they go to places who are almost bankrupted, or companies that are almost bankrupted, and what they do is that they bail you out, and in return, of course, you are giving them, at least in the oil sector, two things: oil in return and participation in the companies. You need to know the terms of this Chinese loan immediately, tomorrow. And you need to know to organize demonstrations or whatever, because you have to know what are the terms. It's not just about that, it's about sovereignty. This is my point.
All right, comrades, as I said, Tasneem, Sebastian is not directly responding to a question. I think yesterday the question of the Chinese loan and its details came up, and Vavi was explaining to people what's been shown in social media when my money asked Ramaphosa in Parliament about the conditions and terms. And yeah, oh Lord, then went all over the place. Clearly, even him was unable to explain something. So it's an issue that we've got to figure out what are the ramifications of that. I think, comrades, Brian is pushing us towards a big picture and thinking, Salim, in terms of the what you call maybe not just the utility, but also the system, and so that whatever we do with the utility is somehow aligned with whatever vision of the system we envision. And I think that there are central key issues that it will be important to take forward into some of the discussions that are going to happen after tea now and in the afternoon when we begin to look at, for an example, the question of a sort of an energy system, horizontal linkages, envisioning, so that some of these questions will begin to answer them in concrete ways. I hope that the people who are taking, doing transcribing or taking notes, they are picking up on some of the matters that are arising, so that tomorrow, when there's a session tomorrow, I believe there are no inputs. It's an open session where there's talking about way forward and what we should do, areas for future work, and some of these issues clearly they need to be identified to go into that. This is my last contract for this conference, and I think it's the right time to break for tea and hand over to the organizers.
So if we can break for tea and come back at 11:30. Thanks very much to Zinga and all the speakers. We are.
Okay, all right. I'm reorientation coming back.